December 2nd, 1993. A man dies on a rooftop in Colombia. When police search his body, they find less than $5 in his pocket. 2 years earlier, that same man was worth $30 billion. His name was Pablo Escobar. And before you think you know this story because you watched Narcos, let me tell you what Netflix didn't show you. He didn't just smuggle cocaine, he built actual submarines. He didn't just bribe officials, he offered to pay off Colombia's entire $10 billion national debt. He didn't just have a zoo, he imported hippos that are still killing people in Colombia today, 30 years after his death. And that $2 million he burned to keep his daughter warm, that actually happened. But what they don't tell you is what happened to his daughter after he died, or why his son only has one ear, or where $300 million of his money was found in 2023, hidden behind a wall for 30 years. This isn't the Netflix version. This is what actually happened, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at Pablo Escobar the same way again. April 30th, 1984. Colombia's Minister of Justice is driving home from work. Two men on a motorcycle pull up beside his car. They open fire. The minister dies instantly. His name was Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, and he made one fatal mistake. He called out Pablo Escobar in Congress. He said Escobar was a criminal, a drug trafficker. He demanded Escobar be arrested. So Escobar had him killed in broad daylight on a busy street in Bogota. And with that single assassination, Pablo Escobar declared war on the entire Colombian government. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't some desperate act by a cornered criminal. This was a calculated move by a man who had already become one of the richest people on earth. A man who was making $420 million per week. A man who had so much cash that he was spending $2,500 per month just on rubber bands to wrap it. So how did a tombstone thief from the slums of Medellin become powerful enough to challenge an entire country? That's the story. And it starts with a decision that would change the world forever. Pablo Escobar is 26 years old. He's been stealing cars, smuggling contraband, running small scams. He's making decent money, but nothing special. He's just another petty criminal in Colombia. Then he hears about cocaine, and everything clicks. At the time, cocaine is mostly a South American drug. Rich people in Bogota use it, but the real market is in the United States. Americans are starting to discover it, and they love it. The problem is supply. Most smugglers are moving tiny amounts. A few kilos hidden in luggage. It's inefficient, risky, not worth it. But Escobar sees something nobody else sees. He sees that cocaine can be industrialized, mass-produced, mass-transported, mass-distributed, like any other business, except with profit margins that legitimate businesses could never match. Here's the math. A kilogram of cocaine costs $1,500 to produce in Colombia. That same kilogram sells for $30,000 in the United States. That's a 2,000% markup. 2,000%. So Escobar does something revolutionary. He doesn't just smuggle cocaine, he builds an empire. He invests in labs deep in the Colombian jungle. He buys coca paste from Peru and Bolivia. He refines it into pure cocaine. He controls quality, consistency, production capacity. He treats it like a manufacturing business. Then he solves the transportation problem. He buys planes. He builds secret airstrips in the jungle. He creates routes through Central America and Mexico. He hires pilots, mechanics, logistics experts, people who can move tons of cocaine across international borders like it's FedEx. And in the United States, he builds a distribution network that would make Amazon jealous. Sells in Miami, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Houston, each operating independently, each with safe houses, transportation, connections to street dealers, a complete supply chain from jungle to consumer. By 1982, the Medellin cartel is supplying 80% of the cocaine consumed in America. 80%. And the amount they're moving is staggering. 15 tons per day. That's 30,000 pounds every single day. At $30,000 per kilogram, that's $450 million in potential revenue. Daily. Even after paying for everything, production, bribes, transportation, distribution, Escobar is clearing $60 million in profit per day. Per day. That's $420 million per week. Over $20 billion per year. And here's where the story becomes absurd. Escobar is making so much money that he can't spend it. He can't even store it properly. Picture this. You have so much cash that you're losing 10% of it every year to rats and water damage. Not theft, not seizure, rats. Eating your money, and you don't care because there's always more coming in. That was Pablo Escobar's reality. He had warehouses full of cash, money buried in fields, cash hidden in walls, literal buildings stuffed with currency, and rats would get in and eat it. Rain would destroy it. Mold would ruin it. 10% of his fortune gone annually, just to decay. His accountants told him they needed $2,500 per month on rubber bands, not to count money, not to transport it, just to keep stacks together, because they had that much physical currency lying around. But the moment that really shows you how insane this wealth was, the moment that proves money meant nothing to him, it's the early 1990s. Escobar is on the run. His family is hiding in a safe house in the mountains. It's December, freezing cold. His 7-year-old daughter Manuela is shivering, getting sick. They can't go outside to buy firewood. The police are looking for them. So Pablo Escobar, one of the richest men who ever lived, does the only thing he can do. He burns $2 million in cash, stack by stack, $100 bills, into a small fire, just to keep his daughter warm. $2 million as kindling, because he had more money than he could possibly use and his daughter was cold. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so he made a lot of money selling drugs. That's not that unusual. Drug dealers get rich. What makes Pablo Escobar different? Here's what makes him different. He didn't just want to be rich, he wanted to be a king, and he almost succeeded. Pablo Escobar runs for Congress and wins. Think about that. The biggest drug trafficker in the world. A man who had already killed dozens of people. He runs for political office, and the people elect him. He shows up to Congress in expensive suits. He gives speeches about helping the poor. He shakes hands with presidents and ministers, and for a while, he's untouchable. Because as a congressman, he has immunity from prosecution. But here's the genius of what Escobar was really doing. While he's in Congress, while he's building his political career, he's also building something else. A support system among the poor that would become his greatest weapon. He builds hundreds of houses in the slums of Medellin, just gives them away, free, no strings attached. He constructs entire neighborhoods, soccer fields, parks, schools. He pays for medical care. He hands out cash to anyone who needs it. The people call it Barrio Pablo Escobar, Escobar's neighborhood, and the families living there worship him. Because the government gave them nothing, and Pablo Escobar gave them everything. He's not being altruistic. He's buying loyalty, creating a human shield, because when the police come looking for him, these people won't cooperate. They'll hide him, warn him, protect him, because to them, he's not a criminal, he's a savior. And that strategy works for years, until Rodrigo Lara Bonilla stands up in Congress and says the quiet part out loud. Pablo Escobar is a drug trafficker, a murderer, and he needs to be arrested. Escobar has Lara Bonilla killed. The Colombian government, under pressure from the United States, launches a massive crackdown. They raid Escobar's labs. They seize his property. They strip his congressional immunity. Pablo Escobar's political career is over, and he's forced into hiding. But he doesn't hide quietly, because Pablo Escobar has just decided that if the Colombian government wants war, he'll give them a war they'll never forget. November 27, 1989. Avianca Flight 203 takes off from Bogota, heading to Cali. 107 passengers on board, families, business people, students, a normal commercial flight. 7 minutes after takeoff, the plane explodes, mid-air, disintegrates. Wreckage rains down on a neighborhood below, killing 3 more people. 110 dead. Pablo Escobar planted a bomb on that plane. His target? A presidential candidate named Cesar Gaviria, who supported extraditing drug traffickers to the United States. Here's the thing. Gaviria wasn't on the plane. He'd changed his plans last minute. Escobar's men didn't know. They detonated the bomb anyway. 110 innocent people murdered just to kill one politician who wasn't even there. And Escobar didn't apologize, didn't express regret. To him, it was just collateral damage in his war against the government. But the Avianca bombing was just one attack in what became the most violent period in Colombian history. Because Escobar had a strategy, terrorism, on a scale Colombia had never seen. He started bombing government buildings, police stations, military installations, shopping districts. Car bombs would explode in crowded areas, killing dozens of civilians at a time. The goal was simple: create so much chaos that the government would have no choice but to negotiate. And then he introduced something truly evil, a bounty system. $1,000 for every police officer killed. Cash, paid immediately, no questions asked. $1,000 doesn't sound like a lot. But in Colombia in 1989, that was 6 months of salary for most people. And all you had to do was kill a cop. Young men from the slums, the same people Escobar had helped, started hunting police officers, ambushing them on the street, shooting them while they ate lunch, murdering them in front of their families. Over 300 police officers were killed in Medellin in 1989 alone. The police force was in chaos. Officers were resigning. Nobody wanted to wear the uniform, because the uniform meant you had a price on your head. This was psychological warfare. The government couldn't protect its own people. Police couldn't protect themselves. And Escobar was sitting somewhere in hiding, orchestrating all of it. But while all of this is happening, while Colombia is descending into chaos, Escobar is also running one of the most audacious smuggling operations in history. He's building submarines, actual submarines. When I say submarines, I don't mean some DIY raft. I mean engineered vessels designed by naval architects. Semi-submersibles that could carry 10 tons of cocaine underwater from Colombia to Mexico, or the United States, Escobar recruited engineers, paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars. They built these submarines in secret shipyards in the jungle. The vessels would sit just below the water's surface, nearly invisible to radar. And they worked. The U.S. Coast Guard didn't even know these submarines existed until they accidentally discovered one in the early 1990s. By then, Escobar had been operating an entire fleet for years. Think about the level of sophistication here. This isn't a street-level drug dealer. This is a man running an operation that rivaled some national militaries. Submarines, planes, thousands of employees, intelligence networks across multiple countries. And the money kept pouring in, $420 million per week, every week for years. But all of that money, all of that power, couldn't save him from what was coming. Because there was one thing that terrified Pablo Escobar more than death: extradition. The United States wanted Pablo Escobar. They wanted him in an American prison where he'd have no power, no ability to bribe judges or threaten prosecutors, where he'd just be another inmate in a maximum security facility. And Escobar knew that if he was extradited, it was over. In Colombia, he could escape, he could negotiate, he could operate from prison. But in America, he'd have nothing. So he fought extradition with everything he had. He bombed government buildings. He assassinated judges. He killed politicians, all to prevent the Colombian government from enforcing the extradition treaty. And it worked. In 1991, Colombia changed its constitution. Extradition was banned. Colombian nationals could no longer be sent to the United States. The government, desperate to end the violence, offered Escobar a deal. Surrender voluntarily, no extradition. Serve your sentence in Colombia, in a prison you choose, under conditions you negotiate. It sounds insane, but they were desperate. The country was being torn apart. Thousands of people were dying, and this was the only way to stop it. On June 19, 1991, Pablo Escobar surrendered. He was taken to La Catedral, the cathedral, a prison he had built for himself. And I need you to understand something. When I say he built it for himself, I mean literally. He chose the location on a hilltop overlooking Medellin. He designed the facility. He hired the guards. He equipped it with everything he needed. La Catedral had a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, a waterfall. Escobar's cell was a luxury apartment, king-size bed, sound system, expensive furniture, telephone lines. He could have visitors whenever he wanted, his family, his cartel members, women. It wasn't a prison. It was a private resort with armed guards that the Colombian government was paying for. And Escobar continued running his empire from inside, making deals, ordering hits, coordinating shipments. But then, Escobar made a mistake. While he was in La Catedral, rival traffickers tried to take over his territory, so Escobar invited them to the prison to negotiate. And when they arrived, he had them tortured and murdered right there, inside the prison. In July 1992, the Colombian government found out. They realized what a catastrophic mistake they'd made. They decided to move Escobar to a real prison. But when they arrived at La Catedral, Pablo Escobar walked out the front gate and disappeared. The war was back on, except this time Escobar had made too many enemies, and they were about to destroy him. They called themselves Los Pepes, Los Perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, the people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They were everyone Escobar had wronged: rival traffickers, former cartel members who turned against him, families of people he'd killed, and allegedly They had support from elements of the Colombian government and possibly U.S. intelligence. Los Pepes used Escobar's own tactics against him, plata o plomo, but they only offered plomo, lead. They hunted down everyone connected to Escobar, his lawyers, his accountants, his sicarios, his family members. They killed them brutally. They bombed his houses, burned his properties, destroyed everything he owned. One of Escobar's lawyers was found tortured to death with a sign next to his body. What Pablo does to others, we do to him. They killed his cousins, his in-laws, people who had just done business with him years ago. The message was clear. Anyone connected to Pablo Escobar would die. And they weren't just killing. They were taking his money, seizing his assets, destroying his support network. Escobar's empire was collapsing. At the same time, the Search Block, a Colombian police unit funded by the U.S., was closing in. They had technology Escobar couldn't match. They were intercepting his phone calls, tracking his movements. Getting closer every day, Escobar was on the run, moving from safe house to safe house, never staying anywhere longer than a day. He was cut off from his family, cut off from his money, cut off from his organization. And then, on December 1st, 1993, he made a fatal mistake. He called his son Juan Pablo to wish him a happy birthday. Just wanted to hear his son's voice tell him he loved him. But the call was traced. The Search Block had been monitoring his family's phones, waiting for this moment. The next day, they surrounded the house where Escobar was hiding. December 2nd, 1993, middle-class neighborhood in Medellin. The Search Block storms the building. There's a brief gunfight. Escobar grabs a gun and tries to escape across the rooftops. He's barefoot, desperate, running for his life. The police open fire. He's hit. He falls. Pablo Escobar is dead. The man who was worth $30 billion dies with less than $5 in his pocket. The man who had controlled 80% of the world's cocaine supply dies alone on a rooftop. The man who had challenged an entire government dies with a bullet in his head. When news of his death reaches Medellin, something unexpected happens. 25,000 people flood the streets, not to celebrate, to mourn. They attend his funeral. They cry. They call him a hero. Because to the poor people of Medellin, Pablo Escobar wasn't a terrorist. He was the man who gave them homes when the government wouldn't, who built schools when nobody else cared, who treated them with dignity when society treated them like garbage. This is the complicated legacy of Pablo Escobar. The world sees a monster, but the people he helped see a savior. And both perspectives are real. Both are true. And that's what makes this story so disturbing. Because Escobar's charity wasn't altruism. It was strategy. He bought loyalty, created human shields, used those people. And when his war came, many of those same people died in his bombings. But they still love him, even today, decades later. There are people in Medellin who refuse to condemn him, who say he was better than the politicians who promised everything and delivered nothing. And that's the most tragic part of this story. The people Escobar helped will defend him forever, even though he used them, even though he let them die, because he gave them something when nobody else would. After Escobar died, his family fled Colombia. His wife Maria Victoria and his children Juan Pablo and Manuela had to go into hiding. They were targets. Los Pepes wanted revenge. Rival cartels wanted leverage. They moved to Argentina under assumed names, claimed they had no money, that they were penniless. But is that true? Juan Pablo, who changed his name to Sebastian Marroquin, eventually wrote a book. He's given interviews. He says he rejects his father's legacy, that he wants to make amends. But there's a story he tells that shows just how brutal his childhood was. When Juan Pablo was 14, he was kidnapped by one of his father's rivals. They wanted to send Pablo a message. So they cut off Juan Pablo's ear, packaged it, sent it to Pablo Escobar as proof. Pablo didn't negotiate, didn't pay ransom. He declared war. He hunted down everyone involved, and he killed them, all of them, brutally. Juan Pablo was eventually released, but he lived the rest of his childhood with one ear, a permanent reminder of what it meant to be Pablo Escobar's son. Manuela had it worse. She stayed completely out of public view. Reports say she has severe depression, that she's attempted suicide multiple times. The trauma of being Pablo Escobar's daughter destroyed her. This is what Pablo Escobar left behind. Not just thousands of dead victims, but his own family, traumatized, broken, paying the price for his choices. But here's something that will blow your mind, something that represents Pablo Escobar's legacy in the most bizarre way possible: the hippos. In the 1980s, Escobar built a private zoo at his estate, Hacienda Nápoles. He imported exotic animals from around the world, and among them were 4 hippos, 3 females and 1 male. When Escobar died, most animals were moved to proper zoos, but the hippos were too difficult to relocate, so they were left there, in the lakes and rivers around the estate, and the hippos bred. In Africa, they have natural predators. In Colombia, they have none. Perfect climate, plenty of food, no threats. Today, there are over 130 hippos living wild in Colombia. Pablo Escobar's hippos, they've spread throughout the Magdalena River Basin. They're the largest invasive species in South America, and they're dangerous. Hippos kill more people than any other large animal in Africa. They're aggressive, territorial. They've started attacking fishermen in Colombia, destroying ecosystems, disrupting wildlife. The Colombian government has tried to control them. Sterilization programs. But animal rights activists protest, and the hippos keep breeding. So Pablo Escobar's hippos are still there, 30 years after his death. Still multiplying, still causing problems. It's almost funny, except it's the perfect metaphor for everything Escobar did. He brought something foreign and destructive into Colombia, and even decades after he's gone, the damage remains, growing, spreading, nearly impossible to eliminate. Now here's what really keeps me up at night: the money. When Pablo Escobar died, he was supposedly broke. His assets had been seized, his properties destroyed, his fortune gone. But that's not entirely true, because Pablo Escobar hid money everywhere. Cash buried in fields, gold bars in walls, bank accounts under fake names, and when he died, he took the locations to his grave. Over the years, people have found some of it. In 2015, a farmer in Colombia was digging an irrigation ditch when he hit something metal, a steel drum. Inside, $18 million in cash, just sitting there, buried for over 20 years. In 2020, Escobar's nephew claimed he found $65 million hidden in the wall of one of Pablo's safe houses. He said his uncle had left him a vision, a mental map of where to find it. And in 2023, a construction crew demolishing a warehouse in Medellin found $3 million behind a false wall. 30 years after Escobar's death. Still there, still hidden, still waiting. How much more is out there? Nobody knows. But estimates suggest there could still be hundreds of millions, possibly billions, hidden somewhere in Colombia. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Did Escobar's family really have no access to his money? Or have they been quietly retrieving it over the years? We'll never know for sure. But what we do know is this: Pablo Escobar's money is still affecting Colombia, still being found, still representing everything he was. Here's what I think people miss about Pablo Escobar. Everyone focuses on his wealth, his power, his violence, but they miss the most important part. He won. Yes, he's dead. His empire collapsed. His family fled. By any objective measure, he lost. But think about what he wanted: fame, legend status, immortality, and he got all of it. His name is known worldwide. He's been in countless movies, TV shows, documentaries. Narcos made him a cultural icon. People wear T-shirts with his face. There are tours in Medellin where you can visit his grave. He's become a symbol, a legend, and he died in Colombia on his own terms, never having spent a day in an American prison. He always said he'd rather die in Colombia than live in a U.S. cell, and that's exactly what happened. In a twisted way, Pablo Escobar got exactly what he wanted. He became immortal, his story told and retold for generations, his name spoken with a mixture of fear and fascination. And that's deeply disturbing, because every time his story is glamorized, every time he's portrayed as some kind of anti-hero, it diminishes the suffering of his victims, the thousands of people he killed, the families he destroyed, the communities he devastated. The families of his victims have begged people to stop turning him into entertainment. They say it's an insult, that it treats their pain like fiction, that it makes a hero out of a monster. But the fascination continues, because Pablo Escobar's story is objectively incredible, and people can't look away. Let me tell you one final thing that I think captures who Pablo Escobar really was. Remember that story about burning $2 million to keep his daughter warm? People hear that and focus on the money, on the absurdity of burning $2 million. But that's not the point. The point is that Pablo Escobar loved his family. He would have burned every dollar he had to protect his daughter. He was capable of love, of sacrifice, of putting someone else's needs above his own. But that same man bombed a plane full of innocent people, had children killed to send messages, destroyed families to protect his business. How can someone be both of these things? The answer is that Pablo Escobar never saw those other people as real, as human. They were obstacles, tools, collateral damage. The only people who mattered were his family and himself. Everyone else was expendable. And that's what made him so dangerous. He wasn't pure evil. He was a human being capable of love and compassion, but only for a tiny circle of people. Everyone outside that circle was worthless to him. This is what we need to understand about people like Pablo Escobar. They're not cartoon villains. They're humans who have completely shut off empathy for anyone outside their immediate circle. And that makes them more dangerous than any monster. Because monsters are easy to identify, easy to condemn. But people like Pablo Escobar, they're complex, sympathetic in some ways, and that makes it harder for society to recognize them and stop them before they cause massive damage. So let me tell you what Pablo Escobar's legacy really is. The violence. Colombia spent decades recovering. The murder rate in Medellin was the highest in the world. thousands killed, generations traumatized. The corruption? Escobar proved every institution in Colombia could be bought or intimidated. That legacy still affects the country today. The drug trade. When Escobar died, the cocaine business didn't stop. Other cartels took over. The Cali Cartel, Norte del Valle, Mexican cartels. The roots he established are still in use. The narco culture. Escobar became a template. The luxury, the Robin Hood image. Drug traffickers across Latin America copied his playbook. And the hippos, literally. His hippos are still in Colombia, still breeding, still causing damage decades later. But here's the most important thing. Pablo Escobar didn't happen in a vacuum. He was a product of conditions that still exist. Extreme poverty, government corruption, lack of opportunity, a wealthy country with an insatiable appetite for drugs. These created Pablo Escobar, and these conditions still exist today. There are people right now somewhere in the same position Escobar was in 1975, young, poor, ambitious, willing to do anything to escape poverty. Some will make the same choices he made. As long as there's demand, as long as there's money to be made, as long as there are desperate people willing to take the risks, there will be more Pablo Escobars. The war on drugs didn't end with him, it just moved. To Mexico, to Central America, the violence moved, the corruption moved, but it didn't stop. December 2nd, 1993. Pablo Escobar dies on a rooftop in Medellin, 44 years old, once worth $30 billion, dies with $5 in his pocket. But 30 years later, his hippos are still there. His money is still being found. His roots are still being used. His story is still being told. And somewhere in Colombia, there's probably a kid right now living in poverty, looking at Escobar's legend thinking, he made it out. He became rich. He became powerful. Why can't I? That's the real horror of Pablo Escobar's story, not what he did, but the fact that his legend inspires others, that 30 years later, we're still living with his consequences, that it could all happen again. Pablo Escobar is dead, but the questions his life raises are still alive, about poverty, about drugs, about violence, about what people will do for money and power. Until we address those questions, until we change the conditions that create people like him, his story will remain relevant. Not because he deserves to be remembered, but because we need to remember. We need to learn. Because somewhere, right now, there's another kid stealing tombstones, another young person looking for a way out, another ambitious person willing to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. And if we don't learn from Pablo Escobar, that kid might become the next one. That's the warning. That's the lesson. That's why this story matters. Not because Pablo Escobar was special, but because he wasn't. And that should terrify us all.